Arizona Wildlife Views, brought to you by the sale of hunting and fishing licenses and the Heritage Fund, lottery dollars working for wildlife. Some projects are made possible by the Sport Fish and Wildlife Restoration Fund.
Ready? All right, let's go find birds. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show, Arizona Wildlife Views. I'm your host, Chuck Emmert. We're in the desert today, about 30 miles north of Dayton off Interstate 8. This is a water drinker that the Arizona Game and Fish Department has installed here in the desert for wildlife to use. We've installed cameras at drinkers like this all around the state. You won't believe the wildlife we've caught on tape.
We've got some great things, and I'm sure the viewers on the show are going to get an opportunity to see some of the clips that we've gotten from those cameras. We had one segment where we have a badger that would like to come in and take a nap by the side of the drinker every evening for several hours in the wee hours of the morning, and when he was there taking his nap, no one else would dare come in. We also had a number of circumstances where large numbers of turkey vultures would come in and visit the waters, and turkey vultures are not necessarily the most aesthetically appealing birds, and having see what they do hanging around the water, it gives one pause about perhaps ever getting a drink out of one of these things unless you're truly desperate. But yeah, we've seen some really fascinating interactions because particularly in the summer months when these things are being used so heavily, the critters are all coming in at night, and that's a time when we humans are not round and about generally to observe them, so you get a window into a world that otherwise you just would never see.
Like a fawn taking a bath and seemingly to enjoy it, and this owl refusing to be intimidated by a fox. Even snakes come in for a drink. Steve Rosenstock is a research program supervisor for the Arizona Game and Fish Department, and since 1999 he has led the department's research efforts on wildlife water developments. These water catchments, as they're called, are a simple design that gathers and stores rainwater in a large covered cistern. Water is then allowed to flow down into a drinker for the wildlife, and the correct level is maintained using a float, much like the same system used in a household toilet.
What a water development is it's a man-made source of water to provide water that's reliable, particularly over the hot, dry summer months where historically those sort of water sources were not available. Or else another circumstance where we typically build these types of waters is where there was a natural water source such as a spring or a stream which no longer flows or has been made inaccessible to wildlife.
The development branch of the Arizona Game and Fish Department maintains more than 720 wildlife water catchments, and new ones are being added all the time. Some of the earliest were built more than 40 years ago. This one just east of the Bradshaw Mountains was built in 1968.
Arizona has the benefits of having one of the more better funded and extensive water development programs in the West, so we get the opportunity to work with a lot of different water designs. We also have such a variety of different ecosystems and natural settings where we place these waters, everything from the low deserts up to the higher mountains, so we have a tremendous diversity of areas in which we use this as a management tool, which gives us the opportunity to learn an awful lot and how to do it better.
Even though water is such a vital factor to the survival of wildlife, creating these catchments has not been without controversy. Some critics feel that adding waters out here is unnatural and maybe not the best thing in the long run.
I think it's important to emphasize that a lot of what we as humans have done across the southwestern landscape is we've taken natural water sources that were available to wildlife and removed them. Springs have been dried up, creeks no longer flow, rivers no longer flow. We've built highways and other types of things that keep animals from moving where they would have been able to before, so even if a water source was still present, they may not be able to get to it. So a lot of what we do with waters is intended to mitigate the loss of natural sources. Yeah, interestingly, some of the research we've done over the last 5 years at waters like this, we found that actually the bulk of the use is not by game species. The game species do use it quite a bit, but the bulk of the use is by things such as bats and passerine birds and some species of hawks and owls, which actually make quite a bit of use of it.
Cameras have been installed at a number of these sites so the researchers can get a first-hand look at who is using these drinkers and how often. They also are looking to see if predators set up camp at the drinkers and just lie in wait for prey species. So far, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Just to throw some numbers at you, we had several cameras down in the Yuma area, and we operated them for about 40,000 hours of actual operation time, 24 hours a day, 5 days a week over a 3-year period. And I think over that entire aggregate, I think we observed maybe a total of about half a dozen or so instances where we actually saw a predation event occur. So it's apparently a fairly uncommon type of thing.
And cameras aren't the only means the department is using to understand the movement of predators around drinkers. Research biologist Bob Waddell is working on a howling survey. Basically, he plays recorded coyote howls for 20 seconds. Then he listens for 2 minutes and counts the number of howls that respond.
We're listening for coyotes to respond to our call. That's the thing to note about howling surveys is that not every coyote is going to respond to the calls. It's very possible that there is a coyote or coyotes out here that has heard the call and possibly is coming in to investigate, but won't make a sound.
After recording his data, he moves to the next location. There are 7 designated stops for him on this 20-mile route.
We came in actually this past March and we set up the 2 routes, and each route has 7 stations, and we have each little stake marked, and there's a reflective tape on the bushes and on the stake. We also have maps that have odometer readings, and we can pretty much go right to the point. And that keeps it standardized, and we always know where to stop, and keeps it the same each time.
The area of this survey is the Palomas Plains, just east of the Yuma Proving Grounds. It's a rough, wash-riddled area where the term road has a very loose definition.
We haven't been out here in about 2 months, so we've had a few rains obviously in this area since the last time we were here. So we were just driving down through here and ran into one of those little obstacles, so ended up having to move that. But that happens out here. It's just something you have to deal with. Trying to navigate our way through this wash here. They get awfully bumpy. You get some of these flash floods that come through here, and it can really change the way these washes look. And sometimes it makes them a lot more difficult to get through.
Like this wash, where rains eroded the bank so much we had to pile up rocks, hoping that would create enough traction to get us to the other side of the creek bed.
Good.
We successfully traverse the wash and head to the next station and try to get the coyotes to sing to us.
That little adventure in the wash messed everything up a little bit. Let's get everything tangled up. It's sometimes difficult to differentiate when you have several coyotes like that howling. Usually I sort of played on the conservative side. I want to say that was probably 3 coyotes. I know it was at least 2. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when I'm a little in doubt, I'll just go ahead and be conservative, and in this case I may just go ahead and list 2.
Bob and a partner who is working another route in the same general area will be out here collecting data every 8 weeks for 1 year.
Okay. I'll try from the other side. Okay, that's the end of that calling session. Yeah, that's a really difficult when they're that far away, though. That's the problem.
It's a good response, though, wasn't it?
That's a really good response. It makes it hard to sort of guess how many might be out there. It sounded like several animals, but it becomes a little subjective, unfortunately, trying to decide what that is, whether that's 2 or 4 or 5 animals or more. I'm going to actually go ahead and guess at 3 on that. It might have been more, but those coyotes were pretty far.
Bob also takes air temperature and wind speed readings at every stop and uses a compass to indicate the direction from which the coyotes are howling.
Yeah, this is not a bad night. We're actually hearing some good responses at several stations. That's great. Hopefully after we're done here and with the a pilot study we did over on the East Tactical Range, we may get a better idea of what times are better and when these coyotes are a little more active and when they're howling more and things like that.
Over the course of this study, Bob's data shows he's got twice as many responses from coyotes in areas that have water as opposed to those that don't. But what it doesn't tell him is how long the coyotes stay in the area before they move on. Coyotes are famous for their adaptability and their skill as predators, but that's only part of the reason Bob finds them so interesting to study.
It's always kind of a privilege to be able to be in a sort of a wild place and hear creatures like coyotes calling, and whether it's a loon or an elk or a wolf, it's always something special.
It's almost 2 a.m., and Bob has finally completed tonight's survey and is now heading back to camp. With a full moon to help light his way, it seems to be an even more appropriate night to be listening for the song of the coyote. The moon is setting over the Kofa Mountains of western Arizona. The cool of night gives way to the heat of the next day here in the Yuma Valley. Temps can hit $120 in the sun-scorched afternoon. Wildlife in this part of the state has evolved over time to adapt to this harsh desert environment. But on this day, a cloud of dust in the distance brings the promise of relief. It's a convoy of trucks and equipment from the Yuma Valley Rod and Gun Club. The Rod and Gun Club volunteers are going to build a watering hole for wildlife.
You know, just about everything out here will use this water. It's the mule deer is the target species. That's primarily what it's being built for. But it'll benefit a lot of other animals. All the native birds that live in the area, a lot of migrants will use the water. So just about everything that lives in the area, outside some of the smallest rodents that almost never drink, almost everything else will use this water.
With the sun beating down and the elements dry and hard, it is far from an easy undertaking to build anything out here. But when you combine the skill and knowledge of the Yuma Valley Rod and Gun Club volunteers, anything can happen, and it usually does.
We've got people that are equipment operators, plumbers, general laborers, people that work with concrete. And when you get that kind of expertise out here and everything's here, it's a snap.
177 right there.
Survey stakes mark the spot, and a trackhoe goes to work. It will rough out a trench big enough to hold 3 rows of these large plastic pipes. They'll act as a storage tank for the water. There are 24 pipes in all, and they have to be set perfectly level to be able to hold up to 12,000 gallons of water when full. It's like gluing together your sprinkler pipes at home, only on a much larger scale. The pipes are designed to collect water from the nearby washes when they are running. It's a design pioneered in California and much better looking than the drinkers installed years ago.
We can pretty much build a catchment now that you won't know it's there until you practically trip on it.
The new one will be completely underground when it's finished. It is such an efficient process that the water drinker is designed to last upwards of 50 years without any substantial maintenance. If this looks like hard work to you, well, it is. But that doesn't mean these tough guys aren't having some fun.
You know, we work hard, but we play hard. And when you go out, it doesn't matter if it's just generally in life, you know, you do good things, you have fun working hard, but if you enjoy what you're doing, it's a piece of cake.
There's not much you can do in a weekend that'll have a lasting positive effect for 50 years or more.
Partnerships between governmental agencies and private groups are crucial to the conservation of Arizona's wildlife. Here, the Yuma County Water Users Association has supplied some heavy equipment and the operators. The Arizona Game and Fish Department teams up with the Rod and Gun Club to get the whole project done in a single weekend. And no stranger to hard work, Arizona Game and Fish Commissioner Joe Melton is lending a hand to help with the volunteer project.
This is really a great example of a lot of different organizations working together to provide water for wildlife, whether it's for deer, sheep, antelope, or just quail or dove or any species that's out here.
It's finally time to set the actual water drinker into the ground. This is where wildlife will find the water stored in the underground tanks. This is the 15th project the Yuma Rod and Gun Club has built in the past 2 years.
Can't say enough about what they bring to this project. Without their assistance, it would be many, many years before we could get that work done.
You put a dollar figure per hour on all the people out here, you're saving the state and the department a lot of money. And it's all people here, it's all volunteer, nobody's getting anything out of it other than the satisfaction of doing something for wildlife.
These guys can head home, a little sore but satisfied in knowing they have made a difference for wildlife.
Arizona is a great place. You don't have to travel too far to find a flowing stream like this one. Most of us, though, live in one desert or another, and that's the last place you'd expect to find an animal like the beaver. But surprisingly, beavers once thrived in Arizona, including our deserts.
In fact, it was Arizona's aquatic resources and wildlife that attracted the first trappers and mountain men. James Ohio Patty and 13 other beaver trappers followed the Gila River into Arizona in late December of 1824. Patty's personal journal gives us a glimpse of Arizona at that time.
March 3rd. We trapped along down a small stream that empties into the Gila on the south side, having its head in a southwest direction. It being very remarkable for the number of its beaver, we gave it the name Beaver River. At this place we collected 200 skins, and on the 10th continued to descend the Gila until the 20th, when we turned back with as much fur as our beasts could pack.
Arizona has changed greatly since Patty was here. The beaver were trapped out. Rivers that once flowed freely were dammed. Native trees like the cottonwood and willow that once provided nourishment for the beaver disappeared or have been replaced by invasive tamarisk.
Since then, the beavers have managed to find their way back. They were probably upstream in the Verde River system, and they swam back on down here, probably through flood events.
And as the beaver return, dedicated professionals are restoring the places they call home, and they keep busy learning as much as they can about their needs here in the Southwest.
The Beaver Research Program is to find methods to manage beavers along the Tres Rios Project, which is a project of multiple agencies working together, including the Game and Fish, to restore the river system from 91st Avenue to around Estrella Mountain Park. They're going to be restoring that using treated wastewater that's completely clean. They're going to take out some of the invasive trees, and they're going to add cottonwood and willow trees.
The Tres Rios Demonstration Project is actually a research project where we're investigating the best ways to actually create these types of wetlands in the desert. We are planning to expand this project significantly. Right now we have about 15 acres of wetlands. When the full-scale project is completed, we'll have over 400 acres of these types of constructed wetlands in this area of 91st Avenue.
So the reason that beavers are important is because they actually create wetlands. What we have here is a flowing river, but what they'll do is they'll dam up parts of the river, slower parts of the river, and they'll actually make a pond.
This pond will help create new habitat for young trees and cattails, which in turn become food for the beaver.
It's kind of like they farm their own land and create their own habitat.
These ponds create new habitat for waterfowl, shorebirds, fish, frogs, and turtles. Wetlands also help recharge our aquifers, filter out pollutants, help reduce seasonal flooding, and they provide cooling shade for recreationists. Researchers are trapping beaver and affixing radio transmitters to their tail. That way, they can discover movement patterns.
And once we know where they're moving, then we could work on managing the populations a little better. When we go to trap a beaver, what we'll do is we'll look for beaver sign on the shoreline. Well, here we've got a beaver drag. You can see all the lines from the branches that were dragged across the wet sand. And it looks like what he's done is he's chewed on that tree over there and gnawed off some branches, swam across this little area of water, dragged the branches across here, and you can follow it all the way across. It comes across here, and then he swims over to the next shore. And you can kind of see a soft area in the mud and going over the rocks where he enters and exits the water frequently, and he probably dragged him over there and down to his den over in those bamboo shoots over there.
Researchers also look for trails left in the vegetation. And these gnaw marks are a sure sign that beaver are in the area.
There are also beaver dens and beaver dams are used. So we'll find a well-used trail, and we'll take what's called a suitcase trap. It looks like a lot like a suitcase that's made out of chain link fencing. We'll take that and set it next to the trail. You open it up and you set it next to the trail.
You want to have it about 4 inches out of the water. Like to set it up in an area with vegetation along both sides of the trap so that the beaver will come up into the trap.
Put some cottonwood willow branches in that.
That's some of their favorite foods. And then I also put a scent mound on there. Beavers communicate using scent. And what they'll do is they'll go ahead and along the shores and deposit mud and other debris, and then they'll mark that.
Because beavers use scent mounds to attract other beavers, to let other beavers know that they're in the area.
The beaver will swim in over the trap, and they have very short front legs. So the front legs will swim over the trip on the trap, and they'll come up and they'll smell the scent mound. And at that time, their back legs will trip the trap, and the bottom will come up and close over the beaver. And it's above the water line enough so that they will be able to breathe. We tagged, which would have been last July.
Then we come along in the morning. We'll pull the trap out of the water, and we will administer an anesthetic drug to the beaver, and it'll go to sleep in about 4 minutes, and then we're able to process it. And what processing means is that we actually take biological measurements and we tag the beaver. The biological measurements include measuring the head from the nose to the back of the skull, taking a body measurement from the back of the head to the back of the body, not including the tail. Then we take a tail length and a tail width.
Body length, head length.
And we also measure both back feet, which are 2 different sizes. They're off by a few centimeters.
Oh, yeah, the preening.
We'll look at the overall condition of the animal. We'll flip it over and check for what sex it is. We'll also take a heart rate, and we'll take respiration every 10 minutes while the beaver's under anesthesia. Typically, one person will do that while another person tags the beaver. And what they do is they pierce the tail.
That tail is made of tissue similar to our earlobes, so affixing the transmitter is like getting one's ears pierced.
And they actually bolt a radio tag to the tail about 3/4 of the way up the tail so it doesn't get in the way of the beaver, and that way it'll hold on.
We've seen radio transmitters attached to animals in some strange places. So why the tail?
Beavers don't have necks for the most part, so it's almost impossible to fasten a radio collar to them, and since they don't really have front legs or proper shoulders, you can't really put a harness on them with a radio transmitter on it. So the tail mounting is really the only way that we found that will stay on a beaver for any extended period of time. Once the transmitter's on the beaver, we'll actually reverse the drug.
Muscle usually right behind the leg. It's a good spot.
and will release the beaver once it's completely recovered from anesthesia. There you go. And then we're able to track it up and down the river using a telemetry device. That's a strong signal. What the tracking allows us to do is find out what different beavers are living with other different beavers, how many are all living together in a den. Sounds like he's right over in that area. Where they're traveling. We have data loggers which pick up each beaver's signal if they pass under it. So we're able to find out if a beaver is traveling from 91st Avenue all the way down to Estrella Mountain Park in a night, which does happen.
This research will help us to understand the dynamics of beaver populations and give us management techniques to maintain those populations. It's ultimately one more step in the restoration of the Tres Rios riparian corridor. That's our show for this week. On behalf of our producers, Gary Schaefer and Carol Lind, I'm Chuck Emmert. Thanks for watching.